Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Todd and Taylor Show. I am Todd A, and with me as always is...
Taylor Trask. Hi, everybody. Hi.
So this is episode 3 of season 1.
Yes.
If anyone's been following along, we did 6 episodes, I think. We called it episode 0. It was like our pilot season. And now we're just rocking along with this new format, which is where we explore one topic in depth.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, and in this one especially you should be excited about, because tonight we're going to talk about one of your favorite shows, which is... Oh, wait, am I saying
it? Doctor Who. It's coming back.
Is that the soundtrack to it?
That is. That's my overly dramatic soundtrack. See, I always try to kind of give it a little bit more movie score sound when it's actually probably more, a little bit more ethereal and weird. I try to make it a bit more dramatic. So that's personal taste.
No, ever since we started with the Candy roller coaster, I'm sort of like, when you hum a song, I'm like, am I supposed to recognize this?
Well, that's true, because you don't watch the show, so you wouldn't know, really.
Right. So I have actually just today previewed a couple episodes to get us, kind of get the ball rolling there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's anything else we need to do to introduce this, do we?
I don't think so.
Let's jump. What's the there is an occasion which has precipitated this discussion, which is, as I understand it, season 9.
Season 9 starts next Saturday. So if you're listening to this next week, which we're recording this on the 10th, if you hear this next week, then the 19th of September, season 9 starts in
2015.
Yeah, 2015. Sorry. Yeah. So if you're listening to this in the future, season 9 has already happened, and what a great one it was.
You're not listening to it in the present, because we're not letting anyone listen to this.
That's right.
But anyway, that's right. So we are recording this the week ahead of the season 9 premiere.
Exactly.
So that's what kind of caused us to talk about this, because you're a big fan, and we wanted to do a big introduction to the show. And then just before we hit record, you and I had a casual conversation about what a cool dynamic this is, which is the person who knows next to nothing about the show finding out why it means so much to you, and the person to whom it means so much finding out why a person like me just doesn't watch it, even though our interests align on so many other things.
It's always the most fascinating thing to me to meet somebody who, by all accounts, should have gotten into the show at some point, or have some passionate take on it. It's just like, just never really got into it. So
that's such a weird thing of fandom. It's like, I mean, I'm sure, given a couple minutes, I could come up with a couple of franchises where I feel like, gosh, why don't people like this? But so we've picked a good one here to dig into.
Give me one quick one, because I'm really curious now that you say that. Like, what's one thing that you like that you're like, why don't more people like this? This should be easy.
Well, if I had a quick one, I would have said it just now.
Oh, gotcha. We'll have Todd think about that during the show, and afterwards he'll reveal his answer.
Yeah,
stay tuned.
Axe Cop is such a thing. It's funny because we did a comic book show several months ago where I went on and on about Axe Cop, and then that was the episode that got totally destroyed by technical problems on the back end of it. So I don't think any of my Axe Cop talk even made it to the show. But anyway, I mean, that's just one of those things where I think, like, gosh, why doesn't everyone in the world read this comic book and watch this TV show? It's hysterical. Maybe not the best analog for Doctor Who, but let's get into Doctor Who. No need to delay on other fandoms. Let's just talk about this. Why do you like it?
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is going to be a somewhat lengthy answer, so buckle yourself in. It's a show that I had always knew existed when I was a kid, because they would just rerun the old Tom Baker episodes, or the old, 60s, 70s episodes on PBS a lot. And I, being a PBS junkie as a kid, would see like a preview for it, or see an actual episode and be like, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to wrap my head around this. Like, he's wearing a cool hat and a scarf, and like, what is this? What's the box? Like, never really occurred to me kind of what the depth of the show was, or the mythology of the show, until was it 2005? So the show rebooted itself in 2005, and Christopher Eccleston was the sort of reboot first Doctor. And I remember that they aired it in the BBC at the time, and then like a year later or 6 months later, they would air it on the Sci-Fi Channel. You can see how far we've come since then. My God. And I remember sitting there watching, like seeing trailers and stuff for it on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I just happened to catch one episode one time called, oh God, what's even the title of the episode? I can't even think. The Long Game, from the first season of the reboot, season 1. If you want to, in the new sort of canon or the new sort of world of Doctor Who, it's season 1, but episode called The Long Game, and I just kind of got captivated by it. It's not the strongest episode, but I was just like, this is kind of cool, and it moves so fast, and it's one of those shows that assumes you know what the show is, so it doesn't really stop to explain to you along the way until a doctor regenerates or until the show reboots with a new showrunner. It just kind of does its thing. So I was like, well, what is this? And I just got fascinated by it. And at that same exact time, the show had already ended in the BBC, and they had already announced that David Tennant was the new Doctor. And so I remember seeing, like, Googling Doctor Who and seeing on Google just news stories like, the guy from Harry Potter 4 is the new Doctor. And I'm like, wait, what? Already? Like, why is there a new Doctor? Why does he look completely different? And just kind of got sucked into just the mythology of what the show actually is. Kind of started henpecking and watching an episode here and there and be like, this is cool. There seems to be a lot of backstory that I'm not familiar with that would enhance my joy of the show more. So I'll just kind of keep paying cursory attention. And it wasn't until season 3, which is 2007, that I, and at the request of a mutual friend of ours, Drew Huddleston, started kind of dropping into watching, because he was a huge fan at the time too. He's like, oh dude, you got to watch this show. Like you got to just jump in and start watching. And it happened to be the 2-part episode, The Family of Blood, Human Nature, which is from the midway through season 3. And it was just like, and again, that if you haven't really paid attention to the show, that episode was especially confusing because the Doctor was hiding out from these aliens. So he became human. So he was David Tennant acting as the Doctor, acting as somebody completely different. So I'm just like, what is this? And then for my, to my benefit, the very next episode I saw was the episode that everybody kind of points to as either the gateway drug episode or like one of the best that you're ever going to see. It's called Blink. And I sat there watching this thing just completely. There's been very few shows or very few movies or just visual stories where I was just enraptured the entire time. Just sat at the screen going, I love everything about this. What is this? So immediately I started Googling like everything up to that point. Like what has the rebooted series given us? Like what are the episodes? Like why is David Tennant the Doctor now? What does regeneration mean? Like all of these things, all these things that most fans are at that point were familiar with. I'm just like, why is that way? Oh, that's cool. So then he meets different people. Okay. Got completely caught up with the show. And then the rest of season 3 was brilliant. They reintroduced one of the Doctor's oldest villains, the Master, who's basically his Moriarty. So that, and the twist in that was really cool. So I lucked out by coming into it at exactly the right time with the David Tennant Doctor. And just since then have, each season since has just been new and interesting. And then where it really kind of hooked me was knowing that each time a new actor takes on the role, it's sort of the whole show kind of changes and refreshes itself. So you've got not only a new guy, but like the TARDIS itself changes, and like the companion he's with or the people he's with change. Sometimes the actual person running the show changes. So you can never be bored with this show. So if you really like it for 1 or 2 years, don't get too comfortable because it's going to change, and you might like it even more a year from now, or you might hate it a year from now and then love it again. And just that whole kind of thing really sucked me in. So all along the way, I realized there were novels and there were audio plays, and there was all this stuff that fills in the canon around the core series, the core 13 episodes each year. And then I started kind of poking at the historical series and never really quite cracked that. I always sort of looked at the older series with sort of disdain, just like, well, that's it. It was cheaper effects. Obviously, the BBC wasn't the BBC that we know today, so they didn't treat drama in the same way they do now. They weren't into building franchises like they are now with Sherlock and Doctor Who and Downton Abbey and all those things. So like you look at the older series and you're like, well, I guess. But the beauty of it is, from the day it began in 1963 to now, the entire canon of the show has remained intact. So, they've been able to flub it here and there, but the fact that this character travels in time and space, that you can do absolutely anything, any story, any genre, any time period, you can make something completely out of left field, or you can have him be on Earth with this, with a typical, just murder mystery. All of that stuff, it all fits together, and they can kind of retcon things when they need to, but the canon is intact. It's not like, the modern series is like, well, when they rebooted it and it's a brand new series. It's a brand new series in as much as it's a different visual and it's a much tighter production, far tighter production, but it still connects to that older series from, that ended in 89 or 90. And in between there was a TV movie. So like you and I growing up, like when we were in middle school and high school, kind of that age when a lot of people discover the show wasn't on. It was just it was reruns and that kind of stuff. So I almost felt like we're that lost generation that never really got to have Doctor Who growing up like people do now, or people did in the 70s and 80s. So it all kind of connects together. It just really, really clicked with me. And since then I've just been on board. And now the newest Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi, is my absolute favorite. I mean, that guy is just not only has he raised the bar in terms of acting, but the stories and the people who are writing for the show. No disrespect to writers from 6 or 7 years ago. They're great, but the writing on the show has just hit this new plateau of quality where like the attention to detail is amazing, the cinematography is amazing. Like every year I think, oh, it's not going to get any better than this. The next season they raise the game again. So now we're kind of in this golden age of the show where the acting's amazing, the writing's amazing, and they're really sort of honoring the past of the show while still keeping a current and contemporary and interesting and fresh. So that's, long-winded way of saying I really like the show. I'll sum it up by saying it's never the same. They can do anything with it, any story, any genre, anything you want. And it's always getting better.
Well, I mean, honestly, you brought up so many things that I want to address. That was a really good intro and just a little behind the scenes for people listening to this podcast. Our notes actually, we just have a bullet, impassioned rant by Taylor. So we knew you were going to go off. What you just said there is about how they can do any kind of story. They can go into any genre. I think is really one of the things that prevents people like me from getting into it, because it almost sounds a little too just too open-ended or something. I mean, that almost makes it sound like an anthology kind of show. And I personally just don't, I don't really care about those. So
well, let me turn the table. So on you, obviously you've had friends and people over the years now, since it rebooted in 2005, I'm sure you've had no shortage of people going, you don't watch the show? What? Like, what is it about it other than, I mean, is it just that, or have there been other things, other factors that have prevented you from just going, I'm going to sit down and see if I can't get into this?
Well, I don't know that I run in a maybe my geek circles are sort of balanced the other way, because it almost seems like the Doctor Who watchers, it's sort of like their shameful secret,
Really?
Like, yeah, there's definitely not been a majority of people telling me. I'm definitely in the majority as a non-Who watcher among the friends who go to Comic-Con and the geeks that I hang with, I guess. So I definitely haven't felt that pressure. I've never been at someone's house and had them say, just watch this one episode. And if you don't like it, fair enough.
Oh, wow. Maybe that's just me then, because like every time I meet somebody who I'm like, it might slightly be a fan of the show, I'm like, sit down and just watch. And I always show them Blink, because that was kind of my gateway drug. And I'm like, just sit down and watch this. And every time they're like, oh my God. I'm like, I know, right? And then it's like from that point on, they kind of go in their own direction with it. But that seems
I've watched you and Drew, as a matter of fact, like talk about it over the years on Facebook, because you'll tag each other in posts, and since we're mutual friends, that it'll show up in my feed, and so I'd always known that, like, wow, there are people that are like really into this, and I could see the conversations happening around it, but I think another it's interesting too, that one thing you did not really hit on in there is you didn't, as as far as I recall right here, is I don't think you described it as sci-fi, which is what I have always pegged it as. Like I've always thought this is British sci-fi, and it it doesn't look very good.
I think, well, okay,
to that
say
is
it
true.
In a nice way. That is true of the classic series, right?
Okay.
Like you look at the classic series with time, and no disrespect to, I know that that's a lot of people love it, and like will go to their grave saying it's their favorite thing ever. But you look at the classic series, and it's very low budget. It's almost too hard it's too hard sci-fi, right? It relishes on being weird and spacey and all of that, and that's great. But one of the nice things that the rebooted series, or let's call it rejuvenated, because it wasn't really rebooted in the traditional sense. The show, right. The story continues. It's just a newer presentation. The rejuvenated series added a lot of elements of fantasy and of dreamlike elements and storybook elements, and so it really kind of took that sci-fi, and then you have like different elements of sci-fi. You have the very the classic hard sci-fi elements. You have the more Star Wars, Star Trekky kind of stuff. You've got the fantasy Western sci-fi stuff. So it really took the bull by the horns in terms of embracing its all genres sort of mission statement and ran with it. And I can see how that would be a turnoff, but it's like when you take a 13 episode arc, which most seasons are, and you have like your sort of building, dilemma in the background, or your emerging big bad sort of in the background, and all the while you're going from a Western to a Robin Hood story to a ghost story to a Crisis on a Spaceship to just a very quiet story told at Christmas time, and with at a family's house or something. Like all of those, you're getting something new all the while. Those amazing big arcs are kind of being trickled through that. That's just, for me, that's just so compelling, because you're like, you cannot be bored watching this show. You never know what's going to happen, as long as you stay off the spoiler sites. You never know what's going to happen, but it's always headed somewhere. There's always sort of at the end of the season, you're like, and we maybe just barely, but we resolved this thing, and now we can take a breather until the next season. That's kind of where it traditionally leaves you.
So one of the ways that I have previously described it is, which I also mean to sum up why I don't watch it, is that I've said it just looks like a British costume drama. And from what you've said, where it's not strictly sci-fi, it's you're not
entirely wrong.
There's a theme running throughout. There's certain things like I can tell that your affection for the seasons is based on like how much you like the Doctor that year, Yeah. So that, like, what's the difference between this and Downton Abbey or something?
Nothing in the episodes where that's the case, but then they'll, I guess, and there have been very much, there was a actual Downton Abbey type of episode, and there might be another one too.
Well, and
that's not, I don't see that as a bad thing though, honestly, for me personally. Like, you can call it that and that's fine, but I'm just like, well, yeah, that is kind of true. But at the same time,
it's one of those weird things, because I think and I believe me, like, I will be the one receiving the wrath from this comment, but it's like,
oh no, you'll have your defenders. It's okay.
Maybe, but it's obviously like a huge, it is a show that is embraced warmly by geeks, but it doesn't really sound like a show that's made for geeks. It sounds like it's made for people who like, British drama.
One of the things that might fuel that and contribute to that, and one of the things that is actually a sticking point for a lot of people who are fans of the show and criticize the show, who get angry at Stephen Moffat or whoever's running it, is that at its heart, it's still an all ages. Some people will call it a kid's show. I say it's very firmly an all ages show. It has to appeal to everyone from age 5 to age 55. And everything in between. So it's got its sort of sillier moments and its more broad genre appeal. And then but it still has to have some good serious storytelling and really clever dialogue and really clever turns that people our age can be like, oh my God. And I think there's this constant push and pull to, people our age who love the show want it to be more a darker sort of, not necessarily darker, a more serious show where, then there's always writers who try to pull it too much. And usually the episodes each season that are my least favorite are the most kid friendly. There was one last year, and it was a bad episode anyway, so I don't know if this even makes sense, but there was an episode last year where I don't even watch it. When I rewatched last season, it was about these trees take over. Basically, all plant life on Earth kind of takes over, and people wake up the next morning and they walk outside, and there's just, it's like a jungle everywhere. And so these kids go on this field trip.
Basically a Rush song.
Yeah, exactly. And these kids go on this field trip, and it's about these kids, and the story was really weak and flimsy. And then it became kind of silly, and it just didn't really do anything. But there was a lot of kids who loved that episode because they could see themselves in the characters because they were actual kids going on the TARDIS and enjoying themselves. So I'm just like, oh, it's okay. But the internet the next morning, you go to IO9, everybody's like, this show, oh God. And the people were just complaining. And I was just like, I'm with you, but man, you got to remember there are kids watching this show that you got to have something for. And I think that goes back to just maybe your perception of it being too broad or too wishy-washy, I guess. I don't know if that's the term you would use, but I think that's maybe where it's coming from.
Yeah, that's a good point. As you were saying that, what was running through my head was in your impassioned rant, when you talk about how you got into it by a couple of episodes that were in the middle of seasons. Mm-hmm. So, which is interesting to me because it's not, that's always really likely to turn people. It's how do you get people into a show? Do you say like, hey, start it at the beginning and give it 3 episodes and then you'll be into it? Or, just dropping in for an episode in season 3 and then dropping in a couple seasons later is like, man, that's an easy way to just say, I'm not going to bother with this. So mm-hmm. It's interesting that you kind of went back, like those episodes obviously hooked you, yeah,
well, very much. They were, and to this day, they remain some of the strongest episodes of the entire rejuvenated run. Like I'll go back to watch those, just I'm like, oh my God, they're still so good. Even though like camera techniques, and this is what 2007, so we're 8 years later, camera techniques, and that has kind of obviously gotten better. And you can see a little bit of age on those, but just the writing, just the scripts, that you can just feel the scripts are so good. Like they're just really, and they are more adult in stories, and they're more, I don't know. And the episode Blink. So let me just give you a primer for the episode Blink, because that's the one that that's the one that hooked me. Everybody I show the show to, I'm like, you get just watch this one and decide from there. That's the one that hooks everybody else. It's the most unusual episode I think they've ever done, because the Doctor never appears in it in person until the very, very, very end. I think there's one. I take that back. There's one like 10-second spot in the middle. Otherwise, you only ever see David Tennant on screen in DVD stuff that he had filmed. It's Carey Mulligan before she became Carey Mulligan, like doing a character with somebody else, and it's almost like 2 people who would have been the Doctor's companions at some point had they gone on or continued on with the show. But it's a standalone episode. These 2 characters that you've never met before, and one of the Carey Mulligan's character, she plays this character called Sally Sparrow, and she's at this old abandoned house, and the very first thing you see is she's taking pictures of this house, and she notices some writing behind this sort of walled up wall, and she starts ripping down the wallpaper, and it actually says her name. It's written on in chalk or paint on this wall. It's like Sally Sparrow, and it's like this message to her. She's like, what the hell? She starts ripping this down. She's like, don't, the angels are coming, and it's this mysterious message, and then it goes duck, and she's like, duck, and she ducks, and just as she ducks, a rock comes hurtling through the window right where her head would be. And she turns around, and there's this angel statue covering its eyes right there. And it cuts to the opening credits. You're like, what the hell? You come to find out that the angel statues that surround this house come to life when you're not looking at them. So you as the viewer never see them alive. You never see them alive or see them moving, because you're always looking at them through the eyes of the characters. But it's amazing, because they have these like actors and these angel statue costume makeups that look incredibly realistic. And they blink, and these angels move incredibly fast. So as a scary monster, as a horror, as a thriller, it works really, really well. But the way they attack you is they zap you back in time to an undetermined place, and then they live off the potential energy you would have had in this time. So they don't necessarily kill you. They just they send you back in time and let you live to death, is what the way it's described. So that whole episode is just like, I'm like, oh my God. And then the Doctor appears, because the whole thing starts off as they steal his TARDIS and they send him and Martha, his companion, back to like the 70s. So the only thing he can do to communicate with the modern day is to write these messages and eventually film himself on these DVD extras that you constantly see. And one of these other characters has assembled them all together. So he's got like 6 or 7 screens in his bedroom that he's trying to study these. So you see that, David Tennant like paused at different points of the speech. And then you realize that he has recorded this based on a future conversation he has with Sally Sparrow that eventually gets filled out. So you never really see him. He just sort of helps out from the past through these recorded messages and things. And only at the very, very end does he actually appear in person. So it's the least typical episode, but it's the most intriguing, that really does set up the rules of the show for you. So I got really that really clarified a lot of stuff for me. Like, oh, this is what the TARDIS is, and this is why it's important, and this is how it works, and this is why nobody can just travel with the Doctor. Not just anybody can travel with the Doctor. It's got to be, there's a certain circumstance to it. So I don't know. I really dug it. I would recommend, though, if you or anybody wants to jump in on the show, obviously you can start fresh with season 9 starting on the 19th, and you'll be completely fine. I would, if you really want to get into it, though, I would start with season 3, episode 1, because David Tennant's in his prime as the Doctor. He had one season before where he kind of got his feet under him, so he's really rocking for it. The writers are writing for him now, and they introduce a new companion in Martha. So whenever they introduce a new companion, they sort of re-explain the show to that person, and then you as the viewer get to kind of see what the show's about that way. Because they're like, this is why the TARDIS is bigger on the inside, and this is what we can do. Because every time a new companion comes in, you're sort of living the show through their eyes, and so that person has to know kind of what the deal is. So
you just brought up a host of things. Is it like, should we take a little sidebar here and give a quick rundown of, like, what is the Doctor? What is the companion? What is the TARDIS? What is he a doctor of? Why is everybody such a stickler about spelling it out instead of just putting DR?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So,
he's a magic healer from the past. Go.
Well, that's the legend. The legend says so. No, so once upon a time, there was this planet called Gallifrey, and it existed for millions of years, and the planet was inhabited by this race of people called Time Lords. Okay. And they were the original people to invent time travel. They created a whole society and sort of political architecture around that concept.
And named themselves Time Lords.
Time Lords, and just sort of took it upon themselves to sort of police time and space and sort of be observers and step in when they need to, but never really interfere so much. The Doctor and that planet and that system had been around for a long time before he showed up. He shows up, though, and sort of was just a punk, basically, like a renegade, kind of not a renegade, more of like a rebel.
Shows up. Is he not a native to Gallifrey?
Yeah, sorry, he was born on Gallifrey, but when he becomes of age, so to speak, he starts the show in his first incarnation. He's already an old man. He steals one of the older TARDISes, and the TARDIS is their time machine,
which looks like a phone booth.
Their DeLorean. Well, not necessarily. That's just his. They are capsules that they have what's called a chameleon circuit. So when they travel around from time to space, when they land somewhere, they want the TARDIS to blend into the natural surroundings and not get stolen or destroyed or anything. So let
me take you on a sidebar here.
Yeah.
Does it still look like a phone booth? Because wouldn't a phone booth be really out of place these days?
So in this particular case, when the show started in 1963, that phone booth was everywhere in London. Now there's like 6 of them, and they are like historical landmarks because they are the TARDIS in the real world. More people know it for that than the original purpose it served.
Right.
The idea, though, was that at some point in like the 60s or 70s, I forget when, the chameleon circuit broke and the TARDIS was stuck that way. Now, there have been, I guess, episodes over the years, every once in a while, he'll try to fix it, and he does, and then it breaks again. But the common understanding is he just likes that look so much, and it's been around for so long that he, as the character, just leaves it that way.
Okay.
So this blue box will, in fact, go traveling around to the time of Shakespeare and just at the time of the Romans and just sort of be there. And it's kind of funny to see how people of those times react to what it is. But anyway, these all the Time Lords have TARDISes. They travel through time. So he stole one, and when he stole it, it was already basically a museum piece. The one that he stole, he took it, and he, with his granddaughter, decided to start just roaming around time and space. And then eventually they came to Earth. They met these school teachers, and they were that group of school teachers was like they were the first companions, and the show began. And as time goes on, people, those school teachers left. They decided to go on and have their own lives. New people would come into the mix.
Well, no, wait, are those school teachers from Gallifrey, or are they
from Earth? From Earth, yeah. Okay. He was sort of hiding out on Earth because he stole this time machine, and so the people of Gallifrey were always kind of like, well, we need that back. We need you to not start to kind of mess around out there. You're breaking the rules, Doctor. And he's kind of one of those kinds of characters where he's not
kind of being pursued by them at all.
No, I mean they'll. Over the course of the early series, the Time Lords pop in, and when he misbehaves, they'll like apprehend him. And usually in the early days, a lot of the stuff on the show that we can talk about here more in a minute, but like a lot of the stuff on the show, everything from the fact that he regenerates to the way the Daleks look to, things that happen in the seasons were based on the fact that the BBC only had the budget to do certain things. So it's creative problem solving on a production level that has stood the test of time. So right off the bat, the actor who was cast to play the Doctor was getting old. He was getting a little bit more. I think dementia was starting to set in, and the BBC realized the show was a hit, but he wasn't able to carry the brunt of it. So they're like, okay, we're going to bring in a new actor, and we're just going to say the Doctor has the ability to regenerate, and all the people from Gallifrey do. So what happens is when you're close to death, either through natural causes or you're mortally wounded, as long as you're still alive, you have the ability to your cells regenerate into a new, your cells regenerate, but in the process you physically change. So you look a little different. Your brain gets scattered a little bit. So your personality is a little different. You still retain your memories, your experiences, all of that. But you basically become a new version of yourself, and you can do that 12 times. As a Time Lord. So they use that. They're like, okay, 12 times. Surely this show we'll never have to see, 12 will be more than enough. We'll never go past that. And they've clearly gone past that in a very interesting way. So like the show and then they use that as a mechanism.
Have they gone past that or on 12 right now?
They went past it. They went past it 2 years ago when Matt Smith changed into Peter Capaldi, and there's the whole Christmas special was about how they were going to solve that problem. Like how he was going to keep going. So it's kind of cool. But they use that regeneration as a mechanism, both for the show so that the show can kind of like change its shape and tone and everything. But then the actors who are with the show, after 3 or 4 years, they can go, hey, I'm moving on, and they can pull somebody new in. So
go ahead. Sorry.
It's a genius. I mean, it was at the time used to basically solve a production problem, but it really was the most genius move the show could have ever made, and is the reason they could keep 1963 to 2015 as complete canon, and the show can just keep going. It's genius. Every part about this is genius because the show never has to die based on the actor or the crew. They never have to. They can always do something different tonally with the show because they can go anywhere and any time. So there's nothing they can't do subject matter wise or theme wise. So it's just, I don't know, the way they baked that into the very beginning was just I don't think that anyone could have foresaw 50 years later this would still be going strong because of those decisions. So he is, because of that, he's basically the same person. Yes.
But aren't the actors playing him, very differently?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, there's still sort of I would say the main difference was actually from the first one to the second one. If you watch the way the first actor played him.
Now, do you mean like the hella old 1963 guy or whatever?
Okay. The original guy. I want to call him David Bradley because that's who played him in the documentary, but that's not his name. William Hartnell. God, there it is. William Hartnell, the first actor, because he came in, he was supposed to be more like the guy who played the Wizard of Oz in the Judy Garland movie. Like that was kind of like, that was sort of a darker version of that. When he regenerated into, the second actor. Anyway, I'm going to get crucified for this. When he regenerates, that actor onwards sort of set a tone that has never really changed. It's always kind of like everybody goes back to that. Yeah, Patrick Troughton. Yeah. So Troughton set that tone. It's not so different from William Hartnell, but it's definitely, there's a youth and vigor and a certain sort of pointed energy to it that Hartnell never had, that every actor since has kind of built on top of. And it's kind of one of those things. It's a genius thing for an actor to be in, because they can go, here are 11 other guys who have sort of built this house that I can now add a room on top of. Right. And there's elements, and that's why I love it so much, because each actor who comes in will usually find 2 or 3 doctors that they sort of click with, and you'll see that in their personality, and then they'll add something completely new. So you can be like, oh, and a lot of people will be like, oh my God, he reminds me so much of, and then they'll list the name of a past actor. And that's why they love this actor. So like David Tennant, he was sort of his own guy. I mean, he was very much like Peter Davison, who was the doctor from like right after Tom Baker. So he had some of that, but then everybody liked Matt Smith. All the classic fans liked Matt Smith because he was very much like Patrick Troughton. He even wore a bow tie. Like, so there was all of these, that was very similar. Now Peter Capaldi's got elements of, Tom Baker, a little bit of John Pertwee, so there's that, but there's still their own performance. They're not just copying, what came before, but they still have to honor. It's a lot like our discussion about James Bond last time. So every time they get a new James Bond actor, it's still James Bond. They're just doing their take of James Bond. It's almost as if imagine if James Bond story wise, they somehow acknowledge that there's a new person playing James Bond.
Right.
And they kind of just silently pretended that, it's funny because with James Bond, they'll keep everyone else, they'll keep the supporting cast and everything in place and just swap out the actor and pretend like nothing's different. Which is kind of interesting, but it's like that actor they'll have their own, like Daniel Craig is very different from Pierce Brosnan, but there's elements of James Bond in both of them that you recognize. And just like James Bond too, like, there's a lot of people who are like, Sean Connery's my James Bond. No, Roger Moore's my James Bond. Same thing with Doctor Who. It's like, no, Tom Baker's my doctor. So there's a lot of that very similarity. They just decided to make it a narrative point as well as just a practical production point.
So to back up a little bit, what is he a doctor of?
He chose the name The Doctor for reasons that we still not entirely clear. It's not his real name. And there's been episodes that are like, what is your real name? Is he going to say it? And they always back away from it because it's not the most important thing in the world in the context of the show. But he chose the name The Doctor because he wanted to fix things. Unlike sort of the default of Gallifrey was, we don't ever interfere. We observe and we might sort of meddle here and there. They're very pompous about it as timeless, but we don't interfere. And the Doctor's like, no, I'm gonna use my TARDIS. I'm gonna use my time machine, go out there and see the universe and help people and try to fix stuff.
Which is why he carries a magic screwdriver.
Yeah, it's sonic screwdriver. It's not magic.
Oh, sorry.
No, he doesn't carry any weapons. He never shoots they're very clear about he never fires a gun as a weapon. He might fire a gun in a MacGyver kind of way, but he never fires it as a weapon. Instead, he's got this sort of device, this toothbrush looking device, and it changes over the years too to be cooler based on the technology. But it's called a sonic screwdriver. So basically, and it's kind of, they use it as a Deus Ex Machina kind of a lot, where it's okay. There are some episodes or some seasons where it just functions simply as that, like just like a screwdriver would. A screwdriver can't do everything. It can just get you out of some predicaments or some jams.
So is he ever like, I've really screwed this one up?
Well,
and he pulls it out, and
no, they don't get that crazy. But there have been times, and I think Peter Capaldi's Doctor is kind of falling into this a bit, where it's basically it kind of turns into a Harry Potter wand now and then, where especially because it lights up now. The rejuvenated series, it lights up. And there's a blue light or a green light, and it makes a noise and everything. But it's very wand-like now. Anyway, it's very long. So there's been a couple of times where Capaldi pulls it out and he just sort of waves it, and things just magically happen. So I think that's rubbed some people the wrong way, where it's like, I don't know.
So it is magic.
It kind of is. Yeah, it's kind of, it's the technology itself is never. They kind of use it. They make it a convenient tool in the story when they need it to. And there's arguments that maybe they should. Maybe they should take it away from him for a while. And there's been episodes where that happens, where he doesn't have it and he's got to solve a problem with just his brain. So there's, going back to my original rant, the other reason I like this so much is because there's so much MacGyver in this. Like there are episodes that remind me, like they're straight out of it. They put him in a predicament. You're like, how the hell is he going to get out of this? And sometimes it's an episode cliffhanger. Sometimes it's like, the best part of the episode, and he's got to use his intelligence to actually get out of that problem. And it's it's really good creative. Like they really ratchet up the fact that he's a smart guy. Who knows. It's like Neil deGrasse Tyson, MacGyver, and Einstein all rolled into one person, right?
Yeah.
Because he's got the knowledge of the universe, he's got creative problem solving. So like that's cool and that's interesting. But going back to your original question, so he's got the time machine. He's called the Doctor. He gave himself that name.
Yes,
and
one of his the companion. Yeah.
One of his and real quick too. One of his rivals is called the Master, who gave himself that name too. And there's a whole thing behind that. But he travels with these people, and usually they're called. I mean, early on in the series, they were called his assistants. Now they're called his companions. They're just people he finds. It's usually a woman or a young woman of some kind. Sometimes though, it's like a couple people. It just depends on what the showrunners are interested in that year. And that person or people will travel with him for a year or two or a season or two. And then they'll either go off on their own, meaning like, hey, I've enjoyed my time, but I got to go live my life. Like I've seen the universe and I gotta live my life here because this can't last forever. Or he'll kick them out. They'll do something to betray him, and he'll just he'll literally just drop them off and leave them and never come back. So he's kind of a dick sometimes to these people. Or they'll die. Not super common, but they always like to point out that traveling with him is not a safe thing, and some of these people don't make it back, or they get trapped somewhere that he can't save them. So that happens, and so by virtue of that, there's always, just like the Doctor can change, every 3 or 4 years, every 2 to 3 years, they can always pull in a new person to travel with him and have new adventures. And you, as a new person to the show, can kind of find your way into the show through these companions. So that's cool. That's been really cool. And there's been countless companions over the years that have. So there are actually more companions than there are Doctors. I mean, far more.
I guess I figured that out as you were saying that, but I wasn't quite putting it together because it seemed like what I understood in recent years, and some of my understanding of this comes from just seeing people cosplay this at conventions. So I guess at least it's probably accurate to say people are fans of the companion as much as they are of the Doctor, right? I mean,
mm-hmm. Yeah. There's people
really like a certain companion, and that's who they're going to cosplay as, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's people who like Rose. So Billie Piper played Rose, and she was the first companion of the rebooted series, and a lot of people liked her. I think more recently, though, a lot of people like Amy and Rory, who's played by oh my god, the names of these actors just don't hit me right away. Karen Gillan, who's was in Guardians of the Galaxy most recently, and Arthur Duvall, who's in a lot of cool stuff. But like those two were really, and I was a huge fan of them too. So like Matt Smith, the reason Matt Smith's era was so popular is because Amy and Rory were so equally likable, and it felt more like, it was the Doctor and these two, so it felt more like a gang of friends, and not like here's this old guy and this young girl, and that's kind of creepy, but we'll go with it, Yeah, so there's definitely people who will, and it's really easy to cosplay as a companion. I mean, like they're usually wearing clothes that you can just go and buy and find mostly anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, for all I know, it's just the person who came to the convention with a guy cosplaying as Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's cool. And likewise for the Doctor, it's really not hard to find costumes that are similar to any of your favorite Doctors. Like I think, and then each actor kind of puts their own stamp on it, so the costumes are so unique. Accessible, but still so unique. So you can find, you can. That's why you see so much Doctor Who cosplays, because it's not like they're wearing, crazy alien, gear or anything like that you have to make yourself, or an Iron Man suit you have to spend 3 months making before you show up. You can literally go down this weekend to a thrift store and find a pretty close, if not exactly the same Doctor Who costume for whoever you want to be. Right. So that's cool. But yeah, so there's the companions, and then the reason he's kind of, and this is kind of an important point. So right before the Rejuvenated series started, in the events of the show, Gallifrey got into a war with the Daleks. And if you want to know what the Daleks are, right, they are the robots that have the plungers coming out of them, for lack of a better, you see like the big long eye, and then you see like where their arms should be, there's like a spatula and then a plunger.
Right.
And that literally came to be because the BBC at that time was just, they just could not afford to build an entire robot army. So they're just like, let's just add this and this and spray paint it, and there you go. But they made it, the voices at that time were really creepy. So they've kind of endured as a character because they were the original. I think they were the very first villain that the show introduced, and that was kind of the thing that everybody in 1963, it was like, oh my God, the show is something interesting. So the Daleks have endured this whole time, but in the canon of the show, they got into a big war with Gallifrey, the Time Lords, and both sides wiped each other out. And the Doctor was originally thought of to be the only one, and it turned out to be like one of 2 or 3 who survived. And so when that happened, he decided to make Earth his new home and just sort of started hanging out here. And that's why all the new series is very Earth. You know, it's like a lot of the stuff happens on Earth, or just, you know, he treats Earth very carefully because this was sort of his adoptive home after that happened. So very much there's like a Superman kind of vibe there too that worked its way into the show.
Well, let me zoom out a little bit, because one of the things that I thought was interesting to talk about, as it, you know, whether it's a positive or negative bias, is sort of the very Britishness of the show. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the one example I brought up when we were brainstorming about it was Star Wars being so clearly like a sci-fi Western, you know, combined with a samurai film. But it's still, Star Wars has a very American take on sci-fi. You know, there's the rebels and there's the Empire, and it's this kid out in the desert who can, you know, blast a womp rat at whatever, 20 parsecs or something. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, it's cowboys and Indians. I don't know how we get into that with Doctor Who, but we just sense, whether it's the scarf or the bow tie, there's just a very British sense to it. I mean, how do you think that that plays into the show? How does it play into your appreciation of it?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because like when you start watching the show, as long as I have, you sort of forget that it is a British show. You know, it's sort of, I mean, obviously everybody's got a British accent, and there are some of those trappings, but it's only when you think that. And I was explaining the show to somebody else recently, and I'm like, it's the British version of Back to the Future, or better put, Back to the Future is the American Doctor Who. I mean, almost very, very, very similar. You've got this interesting, intrinsic old guy who pals around with this younger person through time, in this really cool, interesting time machine. You know, that's kind of, you know, fits into the modern, you know, at that time, the modern sort of sensibilities of what a time machine could be. It's like, well, it just blends in. It's a DeLorean. I'm like, what? Much like, you know, and you almost hear verbatim, like a phone box or a phone booth. What? So I think
that right there is such a great example of the difference between the way Americans do sci-fi or fantasy and the way, you know, the Brits might, because, you know, if you look at Back to the Future, the DeLorean at that moment was supposed to be like the cool car. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so it was definitely like, we're going to put Marty McFly in the cool thing. But the British went, no, let's pick something really like ordinary and clunky. You know, it was almost silly. Like the way they picked it. On the exterior, though, because the interior is supposed to be, so the TARDIS on the inside, surely on the outside it's a small, you know, foam box looking thing, but the Time Lords figured out dimensional physics. So as you walk into it, it's, you know, infinitely bigger on the inside. That's always kind of the big, like, it's bigger on the inside. Like, that's, if you see shirts that say that, that's what they're referring to. Yes.
So there's that, I think, practicality of, let's take this amazing, incredible thing and hide it in an ordinary, you know, sort of, and that's an interesting, if that's a commentary, it's interesting to think that might be a commentary on British life at that time, you know, like, you know, as the 60s started, the World War II, you know, was still fresh in their minds. There's still very much a conservative kind of undercurrent to British life, and for them to take, you know, like, take these fascinating, fantastical things, but still keep them sort of, you know, under wraps, and, you know, in a, you know, that's interesting to consider.
Yeah, I wonder if, you know, possibly it was chosen in the 60s as this is a very modern, you know, thing that you're going to see on the streets. It's a phone box, but when they rejuvenated the series, or even in the 80s when they were doing it, they had to know, like, this is just really dorky, you know, but I don't know. They're British, so maybe they don't know.
Well, so I mean, the Britishness of it, I think, is an appeal to it. Just like, you know, people watch Sherlock, and, you know, I think the people that are in love with this Cumberbatch version of Sherlock love it because it is so British. You know, it's so London. Everything about it is like, it's modern London. It is that. Whereas I think, you know, the show Elementary, which is the American version of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, right.
Is sort of just like thought of as this like weird little objet d'art, because it's like, well, what is this? Because it's like it's trying to take that and put it into this American format. It just doesn't work. So I think I think the fact that it is very British, or has that baked into its DNA is appealing. But again, once you start watching the show, that kind of goes away. You kind of stop, and even now, because Capaldi, I mean, yes, Scotland is part of the the British Empire, but Capaldi's the first Doctor to use his actual not English accent. So he's running around with the Scottish accent, and at first you're kind of like, what? And they make some sort of jokes about it on the show, but it's the first time ever in the show's history that the actor playing the Doctor didn't try to change their accent to be English. Like David Tennant is as Scottish as the day is long, but he found kind of a half Glaswegian kind of accent that it's not quite English, but it's definitely in that vein, instead of just using his native accent, which it worked for him then. But I love that Capaldi's Doctor is so very much him that it would have been weird to have him try to fake an English accent, I think. So I don't know, that all kind of fits into it. I think, again, but you watch it now, they've done a lot to really make the show seem international. And this ties into again, as the show has gotten bigger, the BBC has smartly realized the franchise opportunity. Basically, they're like, okay, we missed this the first time around. We just had a show, and then Star Wars happened, and we never really paid attention. So now let's do everything to the show that they did to Star Wars. Let's have licensing deals and merchandise, and we'll try to film. We'll syndicate it worldwide, and we'll really try to make this a global property. And I think it might even be, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but this might be the first truly global entertainment property where it's meant for a global audience. Like the BBC will run. It took a couple years, but they finally got to the point where it'll air on Saturday night in England, which is like 1 or 2 o'clock our time. And then, so they'll always have it first, no matter what, just because of their time zone. But then same day, it will air here on BBC America. Then it will air in Australia. The next day, you can buy all the episodes on iTunes or Amazon or whatever. They film stuff in America. They film stuff in Australia. They really try to emphasize the fact this is now a global property, and there's an audience globally that they have to start to appeal to. So you've seen it kind of still be British, but definitely find its rhythm with with an American audience, with an Australian audience, with an Asian audience. Like it's trying to figure that out. And as the show evolves, I think that'll just keep happening.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing you point out, which is not because I've not watched a full episode ever, but I have seen from the promotions for Peter Capaldi that it's definitely like it's a different look, and some of those even with David Tennant and Matt Smith, some of their dress was a little anachronistic. I mean, it was definitely like for me, a callback to the like Tom Baker years or something. Yeah. I mean, that was what I saw was, oh, they just keep putting this guy in tweed and a bow tie and giving him a scarf.
Well, part of that though was because Matt Smith was so young. I think their point with that was we're going to dress him like we're going to emphasize the fact he's got an old soul by dressing him like an old professor, right? Okay. Whereas I think with Peter Capaldi, like he's not all, his costume is a little bit more fluid. So like sometimes you'll see him in kind of a nice dapper sort of thing, but then he'll wear a hoodie. Like a hoodie sweatshirt under like a dress coat or something now and then. It's like he's got he looks older, but he's playing it progressively younger and more, the reason I love Peter Capaldi so much is because he's the perfect combination of Egon Spengler and Dr. Emmett L. Brown. Like, but Scottish. Like you take those two guys, you give them a Scottish accent, and you've got Peter's Doctor.
Well, my point on that was I think there, like it's an interesting point that you bring up about it being international, because that's definitely what I see with him. They're not dressing him in these sort of stereotypical British looking tweeds and stuff like that. It's like, I mean, it's even in the look of it, it's more broadly appealing and more modern than it, well,
I mean, God, Eccleston, when he first came in, Eccleston, who was the first Doctor of the reboot, wore basically just like black jeans, essentially a black leather jacket, like bomber jacket, and like a jumper underneath. It's like the most utilitarian, like just no nonsense doctor. I mean, they rebooted the show going, I think when they did reboot it, they were really worried about that. You can tell like that first season is cool and weird and British, but there's a lot of it going, we're going to be very careful about how much of that we show you. And we're going to keep this is modern. This came out in the wake of Battlestar Galactica rebooting. So they're like, okay, this is more current and contemporary. And then only slowly did they go, okay, well, they just got less and less scared to be that show. And now I think with Capaldi, there's no fear at all about, just showing you a monster in a rubber suit that has a good story attached to it. Like before they're like, I don't know, a rubber suit, that's going to be cheesy. Now they figured out a way to do it that looks cool, and they'll have other like really, screwed up stuff too that's really just badass, but they're not afraid to give you some of those classic things or that uniquely British kinds of flair, while still always trying to mine new ways to make it more accessible from an international audience. I think my only my only fear about the show is that as they do that, if there isn't a showrunner or if the BBC themselves aren't aware of that, it might become too diluted. And I think that might be where your sort of hesitation is, where because it can do everything, story wise, there has to be some anchor, and that anchor is the Britishness of the show. Is that sort of that sort of core history. So as long as they know that, they'll be fine. But if there's ever pressure to be like, to be more, appealing to a certain demographic, or to they just kind of keep mining, it might, or if they ever get a lesser actor as the Doctor, that might sort of slip too. So it'll be interesting with the next 10 years, because we're since now 10 years since the show rejuvenated. It'll be interesting to see in 2025 where we are with it.
Well, that's such an interesting point, because it's almost like part of the appeal for the past, since the rejuvenation, as you're calling it, like part of the appeal of that has been this long history, and it stays in canon, and how the people who came up, was it Stephen Moffat who was instrumental in the reboot, or did he come along a couple years later?
He was a writer. He was one of the original writers in the reboot. He wasn't the showrunner. That was a guy named, oh my God. And his face is clear as mud to me. Russell T Davies. There we go.
So, I think there was, it's had such a powerful reboot over the past, 8 or 9 years because of that long history, but it'll be interesting to see if that doesn't damage it in the future, because I think what we're watching now, the way we watch TV now, is that we don't necessarily want series to go on forever. We want to, at least I wanted to know that Mad Men had an ending, that it was approaching, and I think we all feel that way about Game of Thrones, depending on how, your level of satisfaction with the show, you may be wanting that ending to come sooner than later. but it's, we're into this like capsule, of a show. And so it'll be interesting to see if that thing that they've baked into the DNA of Doctor Who, which is the regeneration, is like, ends up being kind of like, a Achilles heel for it, because
two things on that front. One, that is the one thing that's very not British about it. It's the Brits who basically invented short form television. Like, this is only going to be one season. This will only be 2 seasons. And that's it. And then we're on to something else. Doctor Who's the one thing that's always flown in the face of that. Like, oh no, it'll continue on and on and on and on. But I think it only can do that because you can bring in new showrunners every 5 years, new creative teams every however long. It's always this self-fulfilling prophecy that just kind of keeps going. I think, though, to your other point, where they're going to, and this may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing, a lot of people have been calling for the next regeneration to be a woman. Or at least a person of color. Like, so let's get some diversity in there. Let's see. And I for one, to be completely fine with it, because I'm like, think of all the story stuff you can do. They just recently, in the most recent season, made the Master a woman, and that was the first time it was ever acknowledged that a Time Lord could regenerate into a different gender. So they're really like, a lot of people are like, Helen Mirren should be the new doc, stuff that will probably never happen. Well, maybe, I don't know. Capaldi has raised the game so much in terms of the acting potential of this show. It may be Helen Mirren, who knows? But I think, don't be surprised if you don't see that either in the next one or the one after that, or at least see, like, not Idris Elba, but somebody like that jump in and be the Doctor. I think that's where they can take it. there's never going to be a shortage of stories to tell because they can literally do anything. So they're only limited by their imaginations. And they've even found a way to, over 50 years, have episodes that clearly contradict past episodes magically work out in the canon, either through just pretending that we're not going to talk about it or retconning deliberately or whatever it is. So they've managed this amazing magic trick of keeping this all working. And then you throw on top of that, much like Star Wars, the audio plays and the novel and the books and all these things that kind of fill in the story around just the core 13 episodes. It's fascinating. Like there's so kind of an offshoot of this. Paul McGann is the actor who played the Doctor in the 1996 TV movie that was supposed to be the jumping off point for a Fox channel Doctor Who series in America. Paul McGann's a British actor, but they're like, America's like, we're going to reboot this show. So if you go and I have it, I can send you a copy, but there's this 1996 kind of like movie pilot that they filmed that was, by all accounts, pretty cool. It was pretty interesting. There was definitely a very American element to it. And if anything, I think Paul McGann was the only British thing in it. They even had the guy who played the Master was what's his name? It's an American actor who's very well known. And just like the companion was was American. Like everything about it was very, very American. That Asian kid who was in all like everything back then was in it. It just, I don't know, it just had all the trappings, and obviously it didn't. No one really got it, but at that point, but since then, like Paul McGann has kind of become this like unsung hero of Doctor Who, to the point where he got to do like 3 or 4 years of the audio plays or audio books that have fleshed out his character. He made a cameo appearance in a webisode that led up to the 50th anniversary show that everybody lost their shit about. They're like, it's him! And there was even talk about bringing him back a couple times, to reprise the role, when the Doctor meets his past selves or, that kind of thing, which that happens every once in a while. Like the Doctor will meet past versions of himself and they have to work together to solve a problem. But where was I going with this? That was, I just lost my train of thought. What was your point? There's a good reason I brought this up. Oh,
I lost your train of thought too. I lost whatever I asked about.
Well, anyway, there's a 96 TV movie. Oh God, what was it? There's a point to be made there. Anyway, anywho, what else though? What else do you want to know that we haven't talked about? Or I think the way to go out is to say, what are you looking forward to in this new series? Yeah. And where would you like it to go? Like, what's your sort of dream, because Capaldi at this point has done one full entire series and that Christmas special, right? Yes, correct.
Okay. So, I mean, are you looking forward to him hanging on to the role for a while, or, I
want to see him in the role for at least this. Obviously he's got this season. I want to see him hang around at least one more season. It seems that like 3 or 4 years is kind of the average. I think Tom Baker was the only one who went past. I think Tom Baker went like 7 or 8 years, which is why everybody kind of looks to him as like, he was the Doctor, right? Well, he was one of them, but he just was the longest serving one. Pardon me. But I want to see Capaldi another 2 or 3, another year or two. So if he ends up doing 4 seasons, great. As long as he's interested in the role and they're able to still write for him, I think that's key. What he's doing that's my favorite thing that none of these other actors have done yet is he started the role very gruff, very serious, very mysterious, enigmatic, just very kind of emphasizing those traits of the character. Not really fun. It's just more like I have a lot of shit to do and I've got a lot to make up for, and if you're going to come with me, but I can't look out for you. And kind of raising the bar on what's serious. But as last season went on, as a Christmas special evolved, and as what I'm seeing from discussions and trailers of this new season, he has slowly ratcheted up the lovable, fun charm that's inherent to the character. And I think that was intentional. And it's gotten to the point where there'll be a line he says, or he'll do something that if it was Matt Smith, you'd just be like, oh, whatever. But the fact that it's him saying it, you almost cry because you're like, oh God, because it's like he takes that gravity that he applies to the serious side, and then all of a sudden he drops this moment of like, lovable truth on you, and you're like, oh God, which makes me almost like think that if they write his regeneration episode to be not this big bombastic thing, which, if you ask what I want from the show, it's to lower the stakes more. They kind of started doing that last season, but I kid you not, the first season of the reboot, the Daleks were trying to destroy mankind in the future. The second season, the Daleks and the Cybermen were trying to destroy mankind and Earth now. The third season, what was that one? Oh, the Master is trying to destroy the universe or enslave the universe now. The fourth season, the Daleks were trying to destroy all of the universe. So it keeps they keep ratcheting up the stakes to the point where you're like, I don't care. And then at some point in the fifth season, the entire universe gets destroyed and they have to figure out how to reboot it, which is just ridiculous. So there's some of that got a little bit too carried away. I like it when the stakes are smaller on the show. And I feel like Capaldi is going to be best served if he gets more stories where that's the case. You can have a big bombastic thing, that's fine. But his stories, and especially as he gets closer to his end on the show, I want to see that last episode be a small, it can be action packed, it can be emotional, but it's got to be a small stakes episode. Yeah. And one of the best episodes of all time, as far as of the entire show from the 63 to now, that's recognized as one of the best, the most poignant episodes they ever did was Peter Davidson's regeneration episode. It's called The Caves of Androzani, or I can never pronounce it, but he ends up quote unquote dying / regenerating because he saves the life of his companion. And that's all the show. It starts off with him trying to negotiate this deal between these two warring planets, but it just ends with him trying to get the hell out of there and save Perry, his companion's life. And in doing so, he sacrifices himself to do it. And it's so meaningful. You're like, oh my God, this is what it should be. Stephen Moffat is kind of like J.J. Abrams in that he was, as a kid, a huge fan of the show. And so you can see a lot of that care, for the show in his, structuring of the seasons and everything. I wouldn't put it past him to make that kind of a moment for Capaldi, because I think Capaldi could pull it off brilliantly, and just have this quiet character moment where he, he might sacrifice himself for like a family he just met or something you never see coming. I think also the other thing I want to see is, and they're never going to do it because the show's so popular. Every time that, when it's gone from, oh, this dude's going to be the new actor that they just throw out in the news, to they host an entire week-long event leading up to the selection of the new actor. We're going to reveal it to everybody in this live televised event. It's become a thing, which I get, but I want to see just one season or one actor who's the Doctor, where you're just watching the season and all of a sudden out of nowhere, something happens and he has to regenerate and some new dude's there and you're like, and the show just keeps going. And because that's what it's like for the people who are in his life as the companions or the people, in the show. I want the viewer to experience that. I, as the viewer, want to be just thinking everything's okay. And then one day he's gone. You're like, who's this? They're never going to do it. At least not now. I mean, maybe if the show starts to wear thin and they're just, they just need to do bold, creative things. Yeah. That's when they pull it out, and at that point, it might be really, really cool to see it. But that's what I want to see. And then at the same time, the acting just, they had freaking John Hurt in the 50th anniversary special playing another incarnation of the Doctor we've never seen before. Just having John Hurt, who's an actor, and no disrespect to Matt Smith and David Tennant, but John Hurt's like an actor. That dude raised the bar on that show, and then Capaldi came in and just raised it even higher. So the acting is getting so damn good. I can't wait to see who else that might attract, both to direct. We might see an episode where Peter Jackson directs an episode, or we might get Idris Elba freaking in a one-off episode as a character or something. I think that's totally up for grabs. Wow, that's a lot. Sorry, those are my wishes and dreams for the show.
Another thing was I got caught up on. I love that idea of showing. Having a regeneration come out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking along the lines of that's kind of the, it's funny when you look back 2 or 3 years ago, Game of Thrones was still able to do that. And now when you think about it, it's people are reading there's people in Ireland, sneaking pictures of
hanging out at the hotels.
What a new famous person or what other, actor we thought was dead is getting a cup of coffee in the same city where they're filming. And it's so funny to think well, I don't think they could even pull that off now. There's
if I was Sean Bean
to cast Doctor Who and then and then just like, surprise switch him in the middle of an episode.
I don't know, dude. I think with all the secrecy surrounding Star Wars, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, you think about that. Think about all this stuff that could have leaked about The Force Awakens that hasn't yet. I don't know how they're pulling that off, but they've clearly proven it's possible.
I want you to say whatever you were about to say about Sean Bean, because I think I know what it was. And I was
just like, if I was Sean Bean, I would just, whenever I had a moment between acting stuff, I would just show up. I would just literally troll anybody who's hanging out in Ireland and just walk around, like grow my hair out, grow like a scruff of a beard, and just start walking around. Like,
that's exactly what I was thinking. Anywhere that there's a Game of Thrones set, just show up.
I would just hang out in the town, even like don't even go to the set. Just be like, and like,
oh my god, drink, Sean and people Bean. Are like, "What are you doing in town?" You're like, "Don't tell anyone."
I'd just be like, I'd wink and be like, I don't know. And just to fuck with people. Oh, it'd be so much fun.
What do we say to the god of death?
Yeah, exactly.
And then just walk out the back door. Oh my god.
There's like for the next week, so Sean Bean is coming back, and then like it never happens. Like that son of a bitch. But
maybe that's what Kit Harington has been doing.
God, wouldn't that be amazing? I seriously doubt it, because that would just throw the whole story, that whole story, in a completely. I mean, I as a fan would be completely angry, but if that ends up being true, I would applaud. I would curse the showrunners and applaud him. Be like, Kit Harington, you are a genius bastard. Like, well done. That, and I wouldn't even need to watch the finale of the show. I'd just be like, Kit Harington did that. I'm done. That's all I need to see. That's all I need to know. He went out like a boss, man. That's all I need to say. On that note, we should probably go out too. We've been at it for a little while. So
I agree. I want to know who are your top 3 doctors?
Ooh. Oh God. And I have since, and keep this in mind, I have since gone back and
they can be tied.
Okay, that's fine. And I'll preface this by saying I have since gone back and found an appreciation for parts of the classic series. Strangely enough, for Patrick Troughton's run, there's an episode. There's like a 4 or 5 part episode that they recently found in a bin of videos that in some BBC outpost in like Malaysia or something, and there's a bunch of lost episodes from that time when the BBC just threw shit away. They never saved anything. So they found these, and it's called Enemy of the World. And it's amazing because Patrick Troughton plays a doctor, but he also plays a Mexican dictator. And it works so well. And I'm like, for an episode in like 1965 or 6, like it's genius. Like you could do that today. So I'm gonna put him at number 3, Patrick Troughton, because he really that dude's got range, and he won me over in that episode. I was really surprised.
Did anyone ever refer to him back in the day as Dr. 2?
I'm sure. If there was an internet back then, he'd be. I mean, they refer to David Tennant as 10 because he was the 10th Doctor all the time. It just matches his name. So like they always call him 10. I would say David Tennant's probably my second. That dude's the one that got me hooked into the show, to begin with. He got really whiny in his last sort of couple episodes, and he's got one of the most emo, whiny, nonsensical. I hated his regeneration so much. By the time Matt Smith showed up, I was like, thank Christ, just go. Because David Tennant went from being this really, really fun, stern, clever guy to just like, I don't want. His last words as a doctor was literally, I don't want to go. I'm like, oh my God, dude. After the classic regeneration that Eccleston had, I was just like, just go, dude. But that being said, that guy has a lot of amazing episodes, a lot of great acting. So I put him there. And I'd say number 1 is a tie. It's a 2-parter. It's a tie between Peter Capaldi and Christopher Eccleston. Because Eccleston was an actor who was the doctor. And I think Capaldi's an actor who's the doctor, but Capaldi was also a huge fan of the show. I mean, there's this legendary story that Capaldi, when he was watching the show in the 70s, actually constantly wrote letters to the Doctor Who fan club suggesting that he should run it and listing out all the reasons why he should run it. Wow. And there's these internal memos that they found at the BBC where every other week there'd be like at the BBC, drama meetings, they'd be like, we have to discuss the Peter Capaldi situation because he won't stop writing us. And so the fact that he finally became the Doctor is kind of sweet and awesome. But that's a dude who, was a fan, but he's an actor and he brought it to it. And Eccleston's got a lot of that too. And you watch those Eccleston episodes, he does a lot of the same things where he can be stern and serious and kind of mysterious. And then he turns on the charm and he'll like throw a smile at you and he doesn't have to say anything. You're just like, aw, because like he balances that performance so well. So that those moments mean so much more. And I think for me, that's really what I want. I want that really deep dimension. And so those two, I think those two are share it for me right now. And Capaldi, I'm going to guess, is going to probably take the top spot after this season, like permanently.
All right. I appreciate that that wrap up. I think that's a good way to close the episode, our episode.
So go watch season 9, everybody. I would suggest you, Todd, at least, just.
Well, I'm going to watch this episode with Carey Mulligan in it. Because,
yes, definitely do that.
Got to be better than the one I put on today, where they go to a Shakespeare festival in 1599 at the Globe Theater, and I was like, oh my god, that
one's fun once you understand sort of how the show works, but don't make that one of the first ones you watch. It gets a little cheesy. No, watch. It's called Blink. It's from season 3. It's just called Blink. If you watch that and you still don't like it, fair enough.
All right,
but it's the one. It's the one that, man, every time people are like, wow, I need more of this. I'm like, all right, that's the one. That's the one that hooked me.
Cool.
So that being said, I guess we can wrap up, right?
Yeah, this is we're wrapping up episode 3. We have a website, theoretically, whose domain I will pitch to you again. What is it?
ToddandTaylor.com.
Yes. I am at Hey Todd A on Twitter, and you are
at Taylor Trask, TaylorTrask. So check it out. I always have to say that because some people type in Tailer. I'm always amazed. People will even type in Travis. I'm like, no, it's Tyler.
I haven't counted it up yet, but I feel like you have the exact number of letters as Mickey Mouse, because whenever you say it, whenever you spell it, I hear the same rhythm.
TaylorTrask. Taylor Trask.
You got it.
Taylor Trask. He's coming into your home this afternoon. I don't know whether that song. What is the song? I don't know. Something like that.
I don't know. All I know is they spelled Mickey Mouse. It's like one of the classic spelling songs, like that baloney song. But anyway, that's our wrap up. That's Doctor Who in a nutshell. Taylor, I appreciate you having the patience to put up with my sarcastic comments.
Hey man, everybody, you got it. I think there's going to be a lot of people out there who feel the same. So you speak for them. I actually went easy on you, given the notes that I was given today on how to approach this episode. So cool.
Cool. So that's episode 3 in the can, and we will, I would say we will see everyone, but we'll just talk at everyone next week. And until then, please catch us on Twitter and say hello and all that good stuff.
Sounds good. Talk to you later. Talk to y'all later, and we'll see you next week.
Adios.